Before we dive in, Joe, you've been talking with administration officials and also leaders in the Gulf region about the latest with the situation in Iran. What did you find about it?
I can tell you, especially in the Gulf region, the attitude far different today than it was even 3, 4, 5 days ago. And the reason why is something that we talked about yesterday with David Ignatius. The number of missiles coming into the area are going down, not only because Iran's using a lot of their missiles and much of their weaponry, but also because Israel and the United States have been very effective at targeting the launchers. So now they're starting to say, listen, it's chaotic here. We don't love how this started. But at the same time, a lot of people have been talking about going after Iran, who has been, the region's enemy since 1979. And Donald Trump did it. So we're okay with that. And I said, does that mean you think this is going to land in a safe place? And he said, nobody knows that. Nobody knows that right now. We're hopeful, but very cautious because we saw what happened in Iraq. We saw what happened in Afghanistan. We saw what happened in Libya. We saw what's happened across the Middle East, whether you're talking about Beirut in '83. This is not going to be easy, but they believe it's headed in the right direction.
Okay, so the U.S. and Israel continue to hammer sites across Iran with a new wave of strikes reported in the capital city of Tehran. The Pentagon has struck nearly 2,000 targets across the country, and Secretary Pete Hegseth says things are just getting started. Iranian missile launchers, government buildings, and regime leaders themselves are all in the crosshairs. But the fighting is hardly contained to that country as the conflict spreads from Turkey and Lebanon and to the Indian Ocean and the Gulf of Oman. So far this morning, Iran claims to have targeted Kurdish groups in northern Iraq as air raid sirens blare across Israel. Saudi Arabia said it destroyed a drone along the border with Jordan, and there's been a new Iranian attack off the coast of Kuwait. Qatar is evacuating the area near the U.S. Embassy in Doha, while fighter jets buzz overheard in neighboring Dubai. Azerbaijan says 2 people were injured by a falling drone. And dozens of Iranian sailors were confirmed killed in a U.S. torpedo strike off the coast of Sri Lanka.
So Richard, it appears, again, from the calls I made yesterday, that they are very close to controlling the skies over Iran and are getting most of the targets along the coastline and are starting to move to the interior. I'm curious your thoughts here. If, let's just say, things go, and this is a big if, I understand when you're talking about the Middle East, and especially Iran, let's say we finish phase 1, successfully uprooting a good part of Iran's military capabilities they've built up since 1979. What do we need in place politically when phase 2 starts? That phase, as we learned all too well in Iraq, is the most difficult phase. The invasion actually was the easiest phase in Iraq, according to the troops who were there. It was what happened after that caused the real chaos.
Joe, I think that's the question that we need to start asking. And, a lot of people who have doubts, including me, about how we got to where we are, well, we are where we are. So the question at some point, and I think it's now, has to begin to pivot towards what we call war termination. What is the criteria for when we would stop or send signals both to Israel and to Iran that the time has come to wrap this up? What is it we require to happen? Because there's arguments for not having this, just to be clear, continue indefinitely. When the Secretary of Defense says we're just getting started, well, I don't know. I think we're discovering enormous shortfalls in American, weapons and so forth, particularly in air defense systems. A lot of countries in the region are extraordinarily vulnerable. Their energy installations, their water facilities, and the like. It's depleting our stocks, which we need, among other things, for Taiwan and Ukraine. So the idea that I would simply sort of posit that we don't want this to continue ever. At some point, we hit diminishing returns against Iran. And I think we're going to have to think about our definition for success. Do we walk back this idea of a profound regime change? Are we prepared to live with an Iran that still has security, clerical leadership? What are we prepared to accept in the nuclear file? And the funny sort of, Joe, and I never thought we'd get to this, but this is where we are. We may have to reopen precisely those negotiations and considerations that preceded the war. What are we prepared to live with in the nuclear sense? Are we prepared at any point, and if so, how, to relieve any of the economic sanctions? Iran is not going to disappear as a country. It's not going to disappear as a problem. So the question is, when do we transition from a war to essentially a new post-war status quo?
Yeah, and the question really is, what does that look like? It'd be very easy to say we're going to sweep aside everybody that worked in the previous administration for Iran. But that's what we did in Iraq with de-Baathification, and it led to chaos and years of war with Americans caught in the middle of that. So, leaders in the region are hoping that they can find elements, just like you've heard Donald Trump talk about this, that are inside this regime that can take control of it and still figure out how to be good neighbors.
Well, yeah, I guess the problem with that is the leading candidate to succeed the supreme leader now is his son, reportedly. So that doesn't sound a lot like regime change, but we'll see. Jonathan Lemire, as we look at the shifting rationales and justifications for the war, yesterday President Trump said, quote, if we didn't hit within 2 weeks, Iran, would have had a nuclear weapon. That's a new revelation, that within 2 weeks, Iran would have had a nuclear weapon. Most intelligence officials and experts don't believe that to be true at all. But Donald Trump seems every day, or Secretary Rubio seems every day, or Secretary Hegseth seems every day to offer something new to justify the action.
Yeah, I've lost track of how many versions they've offered here, explanations as to why we went into conflict. And we should be clear, administration officials citing intelligence have told not just reporters, but Congress in the last few days, that's simply not the case. Iran was not going to have a weapon, the ability to have a weapon in 2 weeks. And the president simply not telling the truth there, as they still sort of scramble to justify this war. And it's, to a larger point, it's also muddled. The rationale for going in is muddled, and certainly what happens next is muddled. There's no clear plan. I mean, the war, Joe's right. I've heard similar reporting about the number of missiles launched from Iran, at least for the time being, has dwindled. There is some thought there may be some stockpiles they haven't used yet, so perhaps they'll accelerate again. But that is noteworthy and relief for some of the Gulf neighbors there. Still, the war is expanding. We had a missile shot down and heading into Turkey. NATO defenses did that. We had the submarine that was submarine attack yesterday, blew up an Iranian warship. So this is conflict that is showing no signs of abating. And you're right, Willie. There is a chance that what could come next could be worse. There's simply no clear what the next day is. And Caddy, there's part of this is so tied up with the president and his own personal views. And I think that's why Secretary Hegseth yesterday went on that, I mean, let's be clear, disgraceful attack there. Of course the media is going to report the deaths and honor the lives of those who have been lost. And there will be more. But everything is perceived as a personal insult against President Trump. And that is why, in some ways, this war has been so surprising, because he's so inclined to do the one-off strikes, not the longer commitments, not the idea of boots on the ground. And there was reporting yesterday that some Kurdish groups may be armed and head to the region, although there's been a lot of pushback on that as well. So, Caddy, the question is, what kind of off-ramp can Trump live with, as he is clearly in legacy-building mode, believing this is an entry for the history books?
Yeah, and we heard Caroline Levitt, who was sort of vying with Pete Hegseth there to defend the president and attack the media at any possible moment. I think the off-ramp depends exactly on what President Trump wants it to be. And if this is moving in the direction that Joe is hearing, that you're hearing, that the reports from the press about the number of missiles being launched from Iran might seem to suggest the diminution of the number of those, then if there is some kind of a victory, have no doubt that Donald Trump will claim it as exactly that, even if this falls far short of regime change. The losers in all of this may be the Iranian public, but I think Donald Trump will be able to say, look, we have a regime that was threatening the world, much diminished militarily, angry perhaps at the position that it's in. There doesn't seem to be any indication within Iran that we're moving from hardliners to moderates quite yet. But I think it'll all depend on whether it has some sort of a resolution militarily quickly, and whether Donald Trump can then turn around and say, look, I did what no other president was able to do. in 6 months, in a year's time, in 2 years' time, the situation in Iran may look very different and may not be so U.S. friendly. I think we're not going back. We're going from a hot war potentially back to the Cold War we've had for decades with Iran. And once they've rebuilt their weapon systems, then again they become the threat they were. But this president thinks short term.
Well,
Jackie?
and the question is, again, that's what does phase 2 look like, and what regime gets in there, and is it a regime that, let's be very honest, that both the United States and Israel will allow to be there? Because Israel obviously has had the intel, and we've had the firepower, and it's not going to be any easy for any hostile regime to get in there at this point. So the question is, there were reports that Iranian intelligence officers were trying to make contact through third parties with the CIA to talk about the possibility of some sort of transition and some sort of deal. But we're a long way off from that. But those, they have done the outreach.
And then there's Congress. Jackie Alamany, the shifting reasons for immediate threat seem to come every day. And yet the effort to get the War Powers Resolution Act through failed in round 1 yesterday. What's next?
Yeah, Mika, this is about to come to the House floor for a vote, this resolution now between that was introduced by Thomas Massie and Ro Khanna. But before we get to that, I do want to address something that Jonathan said, because I've had this reporting that just came to me. But the personal nature of Trump's position on Iran. I have a source who had lunch with Trump at Mar-a-Lago a month and a half ago, who said essentially that Trump was itching to strike Iran. And I think it does really get to this idea that so little of this is based on actual substance and primarily on settling a score against Iran, wanting to legacy build, and again, a lack of a real justification here. And there are lots of members of Congress in a bipartisan manner who are taking issue with this, although not enough for this to pass in the Senate and likely to fail in the House today. This proposed resolution has been controversial amongst some Democrats, some who believe that this is not, they're viewing this through the lens of not necessarily a check on executive power, but as a potential to, not support Israel with in terms of the U.S.-Israeli special relationship. People like Josh Gottheimer, Greg Landsman, Henry Cuellar, Jared Golden. These are people who are expected to vote against the resolution today. There may be 1 or 2 Republicans that vote in support of it, who again have teed this up as a check on Trump's executive power. Those Democrats that are taking issue with today's vote have come up with a resolution to try to put a check on Trump with another vote on this in 30 days if the military entanglement with Iran continues up to 30 days. But that's unlikely to come to the House floor, at least in the foreseeable future. But this is something that has become a lightning rod between both parties in the upper and the lower chamber right now.
Yeah, and that's reflected, your first reporting there, Jackie, and what Pete Hegseth was saying yesterday about they tried to get him twice and POTUS got the last laugh.
Yeah.
My God, is there no plan? I mean, if this is just about that kind of thing.
There were a lot of people who thought that George W. Bush went after Saddam Hussein because of reports of assassinations attempts against his father, George H.W. Bush. I think in this case,
Pete Hegseth said that was the reason.
Yeah, well, they've said there are a lot of reasons. I think it's very important as we look at the different things that I'll just say childish people say around the administration. I think it's important to stay fixed on the understanding that this has been the epicenter. This country has been the epicenter of terrorism since 1979. And no, I'm not saying that this was well thought out. I'm just saying, if you want to understand why in Congress a War Powers Resolution Act may not pass like it did against Iraq, Iran's been the epicenter of terror since 1979. They killed 240 American Marines in Beirut. They killed countless Americans in Iraq. So this goes far beyond an assassination attempt. This is something, again, as leaders in the region are now saying, could fundamentally change the region for decades to come in a positive sense if it's done right.
Yeah.
But that requires planning. That requires forethought. That also requires talking to your allies and figuring out how to do this in the best way.